There are moments in life that divide your world into two halves. The life you thought you were living, and the life you discover you were actually living. For me, that moment came on the morning I was supposed to marry the woman I loved. Everything was perfect. The sun reflected beautifully across the lake. White roses lined the aisle. Soft piano music drifted through the garden as nearly 200 guests waited for the ceremony to begin. Friends smiled. Family laughed. Cameras flashed. Every detail had been planned for months. I remember thinking there was no way this day could go wrong. I was standing beneath the wedding arch, trying to hide how nervous I was, when the music changed. Everyone stood. I looked toward the end of the aisle. Emily appeared. She looked breathtaking. The kind of beautiful that makes an entire crowd forget to breathe for a second. She smiled at me. I smiled back. In that moment, nothing else existed. Not the guests. Not the photographer. Not even the minister waiting beside me. Just her. She slowly walked toward me, while our families watched with tears in their eyes. When she finally reached me, she whispered, "You look terrified." I laughed quietly. "I've never been happier." She squeezed my hand. "So am I." The minister welcomed everyone before beginning the ceremony. The vows started. Emily held my hands tightly. I could feel them trembling. I assumed it was nerves. I had no idea fear and excitement could feel so similar. The minister smiled. If anyone present knows any lawful reason these two should not be joined together. He paused briefly. "Speak now." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then, a chair scraped against the ground. It was loud enough for everyone to hear. Every head turned toward the front row. An 11-year-old girl slowly stood to her feet. She wore a pale blue dress. Her hands were shaking. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She simply looked terrified. I recognized her immediately. Lily Harper, Emily's younger sister. She slowly raised one arm. Not toward me, toward Emily. Then, in a trembling voice, barely louder than a whisper, she said, "Please, don't marry her." The entire wedding froze. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Nobody understood what was happening. The guests looked at one another. My best man frowned. The bridesmaids exchanged nervous glances. Emily's face turned completely white. "Lily," she whispered, "what are you doing?" Lily never looked away. "Tell him." Emily slowly shook her head. "Not now. Please. Not today." Lily's voice cracked. "You promised." The minister stepped back in confusion. Several guests stood from their seats. Someone quietly asked, "What's happening?" I looked at Emily. What is she talking about? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time since I'd met her. She looked afraid. Not embarrassed. Afraid. I looked back at Lily. "Lily, what does she need to tell me?" The little girl swallowed hard. Then she said the sentence that destroyed the happiest day of my life. "She's been lying to you." A murmur spread across the crowd. I turned back toward Emily. "Is that true?" Tears instantly filled her eyes. She couldn't answer. Behind her, I noticed Robert Harper. Her father. His shoulders slumped. His eyes closed. Almost as though he had known this moment would eventually come. Margaret Harper had already started crying. No one looked surprised. Except me. That was the moment I realized. Everyone knew something. Everyone. except the man standing at the altar. I wish I could tell you I demanded answers immediately. I wish I could tell you I stayed calm. The truth is, I couldn't think. My mind refused to believe what my eyes were seeing. Only one question kept repeating inside my head. What could an 11-year-old possibly know that would stop her own sister's wedding? To answer that, we have to go back 3 years. 3 years earlier. My name is Daniel Carter. At 34 years old, my life was painfully predictable. I was an architect in Columbus, Ohio. Most of my days were spent designing homes for people I'd probably never meet again after handing them the keys. My friends joked that I was married to my career. They weren't entirely wrong. Relationships had never lasted very long. Not because I didn't want love, because work always seemed easier than vulnerability. Buildings made sense. People didn't. Then one rainy Tuesday changed everything. I rushed into a neighborhood coffee shop, carrying a tube of blueprints under one arm and my laptop under the other. Someone opened the door at exactly the wrong moment. I stumbled. Coffee flew everywhere, including directly across months of architectural drawings. Perfect, I muttered. Before I could rescue anything, someone knelt beside me. It's okay. We can still save these. I looked up. A woman with chestnut brown hair was carefully separating soaked pages before the ink spread any further. She smiled. I've seen worse. I laughed. I haven't. For the next several minutes we worked together, spreading drawings across empty tables while the embarrassed barista brought towels and apologized repeatedly. Finally, she held up one page. I think this one's beyond saving. I sighed dramatically. My client is going to frame that as modern art. She laughed. It was the kind of laugh that made strangers feel like old friends. I'm Emily. Daniel. She extended her hand. This is probably the strangest introduction I've ever had. It'll definitely be memorable. Neither of us knew it then, but neither of us would ever forget it. Emily insisted on buying me another coffee to replace the one I'd sacrificed to my blueprints. I told her it wasn't necessary. She insisted anyway. For nearly an hour, we talked about everything except ourselves. Books, travel, terrible architecture, good coffee. It was the easiest conversation I'd had in years. When she finally stood to leave, she smiled. I hope your client forgives you. I hope so too. She walked toward the door before stopping. You know, I usually come here every Tuesday. Then she left. I found myself smiling all the way home. The following Tuesday, I returned to the same coffee shop. Not because I needed coffee. Because I hoped she'd be there. She was. She looked up from her laptop and laughed. I was wondering if you'd show up. I could say the same. That afternoon turned into another long conversation. Then another the following week. Before long, Tuesday coffee quietly became our tradition. Neither of us ever admitted we were planning our schedules around it. We didn't have to. Emily was unlike anyone I'd ever met. She taught 5th grade at a local elementary school. She remembered every student's birthday. She kept extra lunches in her classroom for children who forgot theirs. She somehow knew when people were pretending they were okay. One evening, I asked why she'd chosen teaching. She smiled. Because one kind teacher changed my life. You wanted to become that person. She nodded. If one child leaves my classroom believing in themselves, that's enough. I remember thinking the world needed more people like her. 3 months later, I finally met her family. Their farmhouse sat outside the city, surrounded by open fields and towering oak trees. Margaret Harper greeted me with the warmest hug I'd received from someone I'd only known for 10 seconds. Robert Harper was different. Reserved. Watchful. His handshake was firm. His smile never quite reached his eyes. "So, you're the architect?" "I am." He nodded. "Houses are interesting. They tell stories." "They do. So do people." Before I could respond, Emily laughed. "Dad interviews everyone. I evaluate them." Robert corrected. "They're different." Everyone laughed. Except Robert. Halfway through dinner, a young girl rushed into the room carrying a sketchbook. She couldn't have been older than 11. "You must be Daniel." "I'm Lily." She dropped into the empty chair beside me without waiting for permission. Emily smiled. "My little sister." Lily immediately opened her sketchbook. "I draw faces." She flipped through page after page. Every portrait looked astonishingly real. Teachers, neighbors, friends, even strangers she'd apparently met only once. "You drew these." She nodded proudly. "I like people's eyes. They tell the truth." The room grew strangely quiet. Margaret quickly changed the subject. "Who wants dessert?" I noticed Robert watching Lily carefully. As though hoping she wouldn't say anything else. Over the next several months, I saw the Harpers often. Margaret always made too much food. Robert slowly became easier to talk to. Lily never stopped asking unusual questions. Can someone love you and still hide something? Do people always recognize guilt? Can good people make terrible mistakes? I'd answer as honestly as I could. She'd simply nod, as though she were collecting pieces of a puzzle only she understood. One afternoon, while Emily was helping her mother inside, Lily and I sat beneath the old oak tree. She quietly sketched while I watched. After several minutes, she turned the notebook toward me. It was another drawing of me. The resemblance was incredible. "You've made me look younger." She smiled. "No, I drew you hopeful." Then she began another drawing. This time, it was Emily. But halfway through, she stopped. "You finished?" She slowly shook her head. "I can't." "Why not?" She stared at the unfinished page. "Something's missing." "What?" She looked toward the house where Emily had disappeared. "I don't know yet." She quietly closed the sketchbook. As the months passed, Emily and I became inseparable. We explored bookstores, cooked dinner together, spent weekends hiking or wandering through farmers' markets. Life felt wonderfully ordinary. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about work every hour of the day. I was thinking about a future, one that included Emily. Then, something small happened. Something I barely noticed at the time. But later, I replayed it in my mind hundreds of times. One evening, while we watched the sunset from my apartment balcony, Emily suddenly asked, "Daniel, if you discovered something difficult about someone you loved, would you leave?" The question seemed so unexpected that I laughed. "I think it would depend." "On what?" "Whether they trusted me enough to tell me themselves." Emily looked away. She didn't speak again for several minutes. I assumed she was simply being thoughtful. I never imagined. She was asking about herself. I proposed 6 months later. Not because it felt like the right time. Because I couldn't imagine another day without her. I chose the same coffee shop where we'd first met. The owner secretly closed early so I could have the place to ourselves. When Emily walked in, she immediately knew something was different. "What have you done?" she laughed. "I've made another mess." "I don't believe you." "You shouldn't." I reached into my pocket. Before I could say a word, tears filled her eyes. She looked at the ring, then back at me. "Daniel, you haven't even asked." "I know, but I think I already know the answer." She laughed through her tears. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." The entire cafe erupted into applause. Even the barista who'd ruined my blueprints all those months ago came out clapping. It remains one of the happiest memories of my life. Our families celebrated that weekend. Margaret cried almost the entire evening. My parents couldn't stop smiling. Robert shook my hand and said, "Take care of her." "I will. I know you will." It was the warmest he'd ever been toward me. But Lily barely spoke. She smiled when everyone looked at her. Yet every time she thought no one was watching. She looked at Emily. Not with anger, not with fear, with worry. As the wedding approached, strange little moments became impossible to ignore. Emily occasionally woke in the middle of the night after nightmares. When I asked what she dreamed about, she always gave the same answer. "I don't remember." She started checking the locks on our apartment before going to bed. Sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times. Once I caught her staring at an old photograph. She'd quickly slipped back into a drawer when I entered the room. "What was that?" "Oh, just an old family picture." "Can I see?" "It's nothing important." She smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. 2 weeks before the wedding, I stopped by the Harper house unexpectedly after work. Emily wasn't home yet. Margaret invited me inside while Robert worked in the garage. Lily was sitting at the kitchen table drawing. She didn't even look up. "Hi, Daniel." "Hi, artist. What are we drawing today?" She slowly turned the sketchbook around. It was our wedding venue. The lake, the flowers, the wedding arch. Every detail was perfect. Except there was only one person standing beneath the arch. Me. "Where's Emily?" Lily stared at the page for several seconds. "I haven't finished." "When will you?" She quietly answered, "I don't know if I can." A chill ran through me. That evening, I found Robert outside repairing an old fence. "You've been quiet lately." He smiled faintly. "Getting older does that." "I don't buy it." He rested both hands on the fence. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you trust Emily?" The question caught me completely off guard. "With my life." He nodded slowly. "I hoped you'd say that." There was another long silence. Then he quietly added, "Trust is a strange thing. It only takes one secret to make you question everything." Before I could ask what he meant, Margaret called us inside for dinner. The conversation ended there. Or so I thought. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Robert. "Can we meet?" "Sure. There are some things." He stopped speaking. "I think we should talk." We agreed to meet the following afternoon at a small diner outside town. I arrived early. Robert was already there. He looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept in days. For several minutes, we talked about ordinary things. Football, weather, work. Neither of us mentioned why we were really there. Finally, Robert reached into his jacket. He removed a thick brown envelope. He placed it on the table between us. My heart immediately began racing. "What is it?" He looked at the envelope, then at me, then back again. His hand remained on top of it, almost as though he couldn't bring himself to let go. "You deserve to know." My stomach tightened. "Know what?" He closed his eyes. Then, without another word, he picked the envelope back up. "I'm sorry. I can't." He stood, picked up his jacket, and walked away, leaving me alone, with more questions than answers. I watched him drive away, wondering what had just happened. Had he almost told me Emily had been married before? Was she hiding debts? Another relationship? A child? Every possibility crossed my mind. None of them prepared me for the truth. The night before the wedding arrived. The rehearsal went perfectly. Everyone laughed. Photos were taken. Champagne glasses clinked. Music filled the venue. It looked exactly like the beginning of every happy ending. But every time I looked at Emily, I noticed the same thing. She kept searching the crowd, as though she was afraid someone might appear, or afraid someone already had. Late that night, as everyone prepared to leave, Lily quietly walked over to me. "Daniel, can we talk?" "Of course." She glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Then she whispered, "If someone promises to tell the truth, but waits until it's too late, did they really tell the truth?" Before I could answer, Emily called her name from across the garden. Lily looked back at me. For a moment, I thought she was about to tell me something. Instead, she simply said, "I'm sorry." Then she walked away. I watched her disappear into the darkness, completely unaware that by this time tomorrow, everything I believed about the woman I loved would be shattered. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I barely slept, not because I was nervous, but because I couldn't stop thinking about Robert, about the envelope, about Lily's strange questions, about Emily's growing silence. Every instinct told me something wasn't right. Every ounce of love I had for Emily told me I was imagining things. Love has a way of making you ignore the questions you don't want answered. So I buried them for a few more hours. By 10 o'clock, the venue was alive. Florists rushed between tables, making last-minute adjustments. Photographers barked instructions. Children chased each other across the lawn, while their parents pretended to stop them. My best man, Chris, straightened my tie for what felt like the 10th time. "You've checked your watch 12 times. I counted. I can't help it. You think she's going to run away?" I laughed. "No. I just want to get married." He smiled. "Then relax. In an hour you'll be a husband." If only he knew. The guests slowly filled every seat. The music began. I looked toward the front row. Robert sat perfectly still. Margaret kept dabbing tears from her eyes. Then I noticed Lily. She wasn't looking at the flowers. She wasn't looking at the guests. She wasn't even looking at me. She was watching Emily's entrance, almost as though she already knew what was about to happen. The ceremony began. The minister welcomed everyone. Emily appeared at the end of the aisle. The entire audience stood. She looked radiant. Every fear I'd carried disappeared the moment I saw her. She smiled. I smiled back. Maybe, I thought, I'd imagined everything. Maybe Robert had simply changed his mind. Maybe Lily had only been acting like children sometimes do. Maybe today really would be perfect. Emily finally reached me. She squeezed my hands. They're cold. So are yours. She laughed softly. I guess we're both nervous. I love you. I love you too. Looking back, those were the last peaceful words we ever shared before the truth came out. The minister began the vows. Everything unfolded exactly as we'd rehearsed, until he reached the familiar question. If anyone knows any reason these two should not be joined in marriage. He smiled politely. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Silence. 1 second. 2. 3. Then, a chair scraped loudly across the stone floor. The sound echoed through the entire venue. Everyone turned. Lily slowly stood. Her hands trembled. Her breathing was uneven. She looked terrified. Not of the crowd. Not of speaking. Of staying silent. Emily immediately shook her head, almost pleading. Lily. No. The little girl ignored her. She slowly stepped into the aisle. Robert half rose from his chair. Lily. She kept walking. Margaret reached for her husband's arm. Robert. But he didn't move. He simply watched. Like a man witnessing the moment he'd spent years trying to prevent. Lily stopped halfway down the aisle. Only a few feet separated us. She looked at me. Then, she turned toward Emily, raised one shaking finger, and whispered, "Don't marry her." The words barely rose above a whisper. Yet somehow, every person heard them. No music. No birds. No cameras. Nothing. The world itself seemed to stop. What are you doing? Emily asked quietly. Lily's voice broke. You promised. Emily closed her eyes. Please. Not today. You promised you'd tell him. I know. Then tell him. Emily couldn't. She physically couldn't. I watched tears roll down her face. She wasn't denying it. She wasn't defending herself. She simply stood there, unable to speak. The guests erupted into whispers. What's happening? Does the girl know something? Is this some kind of joke? Chris stepped beside me. Daniel, you okay? I didn't answer, because I wasn't. My heart pounded so violently I could hear it. I looked at Emily. Tell me she's wrong. She looked directly into my eyes, then looked away. That, more than anything, terrified me. The minister quietly stepped backward. I think, perhaps we should pause the ceremony. Nobody objected. Nobody even seemed to hear him. Every eye remained fixed on Emily. Finally, I spoke. Lily, what is she hiding? The little girl looked toward Robert, as though asking permission. Robert slowly lowered his head. He never answered. Lily looked back at me. Her voice was barely audible. She loves you. But she's lying. I frowned. Lying about what? Emily suddenly cried out. Enough. The entire venue jumped. It was the first time I'd ever heard her raise her voice. She covered her mouth, immediately regretting it. The silence returned, heavier than before. Then Robert stood. Not quickly, not dramatically. Slowly, like a man carrying years of guilt on his shoulders. He walked into the aisle, stopped beside Lily, then looked directly at me. His eyes were filled with tears. Daniel, I'm sorry. My stomach dropped. For what? He reached inside his suit jacket. This time, he didn't hesitate. He removed the same brown envelope I'd seen at the diner and held it toward me. This conversation should have happened months ago. I stared at the envelope. It looked ordinary. A worn brown envelope with softened corners, held together by years of being opened and closed. Yet somehow, it felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. What is it? I asked. Robert didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Emily. I begged you. His voice trembled. I begged you to tell him. Emily wiped tears from her face. I tried. No. Robert replied quietly. You wanted to, but you never did. She lowered her head. She couldn't argue, because he was right. I looked from one to the other. What is going on? Someone tell me. For once, and just tell me the truth. No one moved. The guests stood frozen. Some had already begun quietly leaving the ceremony area, sensing they were witnessing something deeply personal. Others remained rooted to their seats, unable to look away. Robert slowly placed the envelope into my hands. You deserve to hear this from Emily. He looked at his daughter. This is your last chance. Emily stared at the ground. Her lips trembled. Several seconds passed. Finally, she whispered, I can't. Robert closed his eyes. I was afraid you'd say that. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope. Inside were several old newspaper clippings. A police report, a faded photograph, and a folded letter. The newspaper clipping caught my attention first. The headline read, Local college student killed in highway collision. My heart skipped. I unfolded the article. The date printed beneath the headline was June 14. Exactly the same date as our wedding. A strange coincidence. Or so I thought. I continued reading. A 19-year-old college student had died after a head-on collision on a rural highway. Another young driver survived with minor injuries. The investigation concluded the crash was caused by a brief moment of distracted driving. No alcohol. No speeding. Just one decision. One glance away from the road. One life lost forever. I looked back at Emily. She was crying uncontrollably. My chest tightened. No, I whispered. She slowly nodded. Yes, it was me. The words barely left her mouth. I was the driver. No one spoke. I looked away for just a second. I thought I had more time. I didn't. My car crossed the center line. I survived. Her voice completely broke. She didn't. The silence that followed felt endless. My mind struggled to process what I just heard. You killed someone. Emily immediately shook her head. I never meant to. It was an accident. I accepted responsibility. I cooperated with everything. I completed every requirement. But, she covered her face. I've never forgiven myself. I looked back down at the documents. Everything supported what she had said. The police report. The court records. The newspaper. None of it had been hidden from the law. Only from me. That realization hurt even more. You let me ask you to marry me. Without telling me. She couldn't meet my eyes. I was terrified. I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because I genuinely didn't know how else to react. I asked you once if there was anything I should know. You said no. I asked you again when you seemed scared. You said you were just nervous. I gave you chance after chance after chance. She nodded through tears. I know. And every time I failed. I turned toward Robert. You knew all this? Yes. So did Margaret. He nodded. Yes. You all watched me build a future without telling me the foundation was cracked. Robert's eyes filled with shame. We hoped she'd tell you herself. I believed she would. I was wrong. Then something struck me. I looked at Lily. She hadn't spoken since Robert handed me the envelope. She simply stood there, watching, waiting. I walked toward her, very gently. I knelt until we were eye level. Lily, how do you know all this? She looked down at her shoes, then quietly answered, because the girl who died was my sister. Daniel's world stopped. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. I looked from Lily to Emily, then back to the newspaper in my hands. The girl, I whispered, was your sister. Lily nodded. Her blue eyes filled with tears. My big sister. I felt the strength leave my legs. I slowly sat down on the steps beneath the wedding arch. Around me, the guests stood in stunned silence. No one knew what to say. No one even seemed willing to move. Emily finally found the strength to speak. Her name was Sarah. The name hung in the air. I've said her name every single day for 15 years. I've never allowed myself to forget it. She wiped away another tear. Because forgetting her would be the worst thing I could ever do. Lily took a slow breath. I was 4. I don't remember the accident, but I remember everything after. I remember Mommy crying every night. I remember Daddy sitting in Sarah's room after everyone else had gone to bed. I remember birthdays that nobody celebrated anymore. I remember Christmas feeling different. She looked down. Our house became quiet. So quiet. Robert spoke for the first time since handing me the envelope. We didn't lose just a daughter. We lost the family we used to be. His voice cracked. We all survived. But none of us were ever the same. Margaret quietly nodded beside him. There wasn't a single day we didn't think about Sarah. I looked at Emily. If all this happened before we met, why didn't you tell me? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into the small handbag resting on the bridal table nearby. She removed something wrapped in tissue paper. It was old, carefully preserved. She handed it to me. It was a photograph. I recognized her instantly. 19 years old, standing beside a damaged car, surrounded by police officers. Her face carried the expression of someone whose life had ended, even though she was still alive. I've kept that picture with me for 15 years. Emily whispered, to remind myself of the person I never wanted to become again. I wanted to tell you. She looked directly into my eyes. I rehearsed it hundreds of times. In the shower, driving to work, lying awake beside you after you'd fallen asleep. I'd tell myself, tonight is the night. But every time, I imagined losing you. So I convinced myself, tomorrow, there'll always be tomorrow. She closed her eyes. Until there wasn't. I stood, slowly, still holding the photograph. You let me build an entire future without giving me the choice. I know. You let me ask your father for permission to marry you. I know. You let us book this venue. I know. You let our family spend months planning this day. I know. Each answer became quieter, smaller, more broken. Then something finally made sense. The nightmares. Emily nodded. The anxiety. She nodded again. The envelope Robert couldn't give me. Another nod. The questions Lily kept asking. Emily looked toward her younger sister. She hated that I was keeping the secret. Lily quietly stepped closer. I wasn't angry, she said. I was scared. Scared of what? She looked at me. That if she married you without telling you, she'd have to lie forever. The sentence hit harder than anything else that morning. Because she was right. One lie told at the beginning of a marriage doesn't stay one lie. It becomes a lifetime of protecting it. Chris, my best man, finally spoke. So, what happens now? Nobody answered. Not even me. Because I honestly didn't know. Half an hour earlier, I'd been preparing to say, I do. Now, I wasn't even sure I knew the woman standing in front of me. Yet despite everything, one question refused to leave my mind. If Emily had wanted to deceive me, why had she spent 15 years punishing herself? Why keep the newspaper? Why keep the photograph? Why carry guilt so heavy it invaded her dreams? None of it matched the picture of a heartless liar. Which meant the truth was far more complicated than I wanted it to be. Emily slowly removed her engagement ring. She looked at it for several seconds, then placed it gently in my hand. I love you, she whispered. But love without honesty isn't enough. If you walk away today, I'll never blame you. I lost that right the moment I stayed silent. She stepped backward. I won't ask you to forgive me. I won't even ask you to understand. I only ask one thing. I looked at her. What? She swallowed hard. Remember me. For the woman I tried to become. Not just the girl who made the worst mistake of her life. I stared at the ring resting in my palm. And for the first time all morning, I realized the wedding was no longer the hardest decision I'd ever make. Walking away, or staying, was. No one moved. The ceremony had become something none of us expected. The flowers were still beautiful. The music equipment still stood waiting. The wedding cake still sat untouched beneath a white tent. Everything had been prepared for a celebration. Instead, we were standing in the middle of a reckoning. I looked down at the engagement ring in my hand. Just an hour earlier, it had represented my future. Now, it represented a question. Could love survive the truth? Or had the truth arrived too late? Chris quietly stepped beside me. You don't have to decide today. I looked at him. Don't I? He shook his head. No. You only have to decide one thing. What? Whether you're reacting to the secret or the person. His words stayed with me. I turned toward Emily. Answer one question. She nodded. Anything. If Lily hadn't spoken today, would you ever have told me? Emily's shoulders slumped. She didn't answer immediately. The silence itself frightened me. Finally, she whispered, I want to say yes. But if I'm completely honest, I don't know. I kept convincing myself there would always be another better time. There never was. That answer hurt. Because it was honest. Painfully honest. I nodded slowly. Thank you. She frowned. For what? For finally telling me the truth. I looked toward Robert. You said this conversation should have happened months ago. Yes. Why didn't you force it? He sighed deeply. Because she's my daughter. I spent 15 years watching her try to become someone worthy of another chance. I thought, if I pushed too hard, I might lose her too. I chose the wrong kind of protection. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. And for that, I'm sorry. Margaret stepped forward. I need to say something. Everyone turned toward her. I've watched Emily punish herself every single day since the accident. She stopped celebrating birthdays. She stopped believing she deserved happiness. She volunteered. She donated. She spent years helping families who'd lost children. Not because she thought it would erase the past, but because she couldn't bear wasting the life she'd been allowed to keep. She looked at me. None of that excuses what she hid from you. But I hope you know, the woman you fell in love with wasn't pretending. She really became that person. I believed her. That was the hardest part. Nothing I'd learned suggested Emily was cruel. Only broken and frightened. Sometimes those two things look the same. Then Lily walked toward me again. She reached into her little sketchbook, carefully tore out a page, and handed it to me. It was the unfinished drawing of our wedding. Except, it wasn't unfinished anymore. She had completed it. This time, both Emily and I stood beneath the wedding arch. But there was one difference. Between us, she had drawn an open book. What's this? I asked. Lily smiled for the first time that day. The truth. I looked closer. Why is it between us? She shrugged. Because that's where it belongs. I felt tears filling my eyes. Not because of the drawing. Because an 11-year-old had understood something most adults spend their entire lives missing. A relationship doesn't survive because two people love each other. It survives because nothing stands between them. Not fear. Not shame. Not secrets. I walked toward Emily. She looked terrified. Not because she thought I might leave. Because she believed she deserved it. I stopped only inches away. I can't marry you today. Fresh tears rolled down her face. I know. But listen to me. She looked up. I'm not saying I'll never marry you. Confusion crossed her face. I'm saying, if we ever stand at another altar, there won't be a single secret left. No hidden chapters. No unfinished conversations. No waiting for tomorrow. She covered her mouth as she cried. I promise. No. I gently interrupted. Don't promise. Just prove it. I turned toward the minister. I'm sorry. The wedding is over. The minister nodded kindly. I think today became something more important than a wedding. I wasn't sure what he meant. I wouldn't understand until much later. One by one, the guests quietly approached us. No gossip. No judgment. Only hugs, tears, and silent prayers. Even Chris hugged me without saying a word. Sometimes, silence is the only language grief understands. As the last guests began leaving, I looked once more at the empty chairs. Hours earlier, they had been waiting to witness the beginning of a marriage. Instead, they had witnessed the beginning of the truth. People think healing happens all at once. It doesn't. It happens in conversations you don't want to have, in apologies you don't know how to accept, in mornings when you wake up wondering whether rebuilding is even worth trying. The wedding ended that afternoon. Not with music, not with dancing, not with photographs, just a quiet walk back to our cars. Emily and I drove home separately. Neither of us called the other. For the first time in 3 years, silence existed between us. 3 days later, she came to my apartment. She wasn't wearing makeup. She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept since the wedding. She didn't ask to come inside. She simply handed me another envelope. I thought you deserved to know everything. I looked inside. There were therapy records, court documents, letters she'd written to Sarah's parents but never mailed, a journal she'd kept for nearly 15 years. Every painful memory she'd tried to bury was there. Nothing hidden, nothing removed, nothing rewritten to make herself look better. I don't expect you to read it today, she said quietly. I just don't want there to be any more secrets. Then she turned to leave. I stopped her. Emily. She looked back. Are you finally done hiding? She nodded. For the first time in 15 years. Over the next few weeks, I read every page. Not because I wanted to relive her past. Because I needed to understand the woman I'd planned to marry. The journal wasn't full of excuses. It was full of regret. Entry after entry spoke of sleepless nights, panic attacks, birthdays she no longer celebrated, the anniversary of the accident, the guilt that followed her everywhere. One sentence stayed with me. I survived the crash, but I don't think a part of me ever left that road. I closed the journal and cried. Not because she'd lied, because I finally understood why. Emily started seeing a trauma counselor again. Not because I asked her to, because she admitted she'd spent years punishing herself instead of healing. For the first time, she wasn't trying to forget the past. She was learning to live honestly with it. As for me, forgiveness didn't come quickly. Some days I wanted to call her. Other days I couldn't even look at her photograph. Trust, once broken, doesn't magically return. It returns one truthful conversation at a time. One honest answer at a time. One choice at a time. Robert called me one evening. I owe you dinner. I laughed. You owe me more than dinner. I know. When we met, he looked older. I failed both of you. He admitted. I thought protecting my daughter meant protecting her secret. I've learned those aren't the same thing. I nodded. You were trying to save her, and nearly destroyed her future. He smiled sadly. Exactly. A month later, Lily knocked on my apartment door. She handed me a folded piece of paper. No speeches. I joked. She smiled. I'm getting better at saying only what's important. I unfolded the drawing. It showed 2 bridges. One had collapsed. The other was under construction. What does it mean? She shrugged. Broken things can still be rebuilt, as long as people are willing to work. Children have a remarkable way of saying in one sentence what adults spend years trying to explain. Almost a year passed. Slowly, Emily and I began talking again. First over coffee, then long walks, then dinner. There were difficult conversations. Some ended in tears. Some ended in silence. But none ended with lies. For the first time since we'd met, we knew everything about each other. Oddly enough, that made us feel closer than we'd ever been before. One evening, exactly 1 year after the wedding that never happened, I took Emily back to the same lakeside venue. There were no decorations, no guests, no music, just the two of us. She looked at the empty wedding arch that still stood there. "I don't deserve another chance," she whispered. I smiled. "Maybe not." She looked down. "But neither do I." She frowned. "We're both imperfect people. We're both going to disappoint each other. The question isn't whether we'll fail. It's whether we'll choose honesty when we do." Tears filled her eyes. I reached into my pocket. Not for a new ring. For the old one. The same ring she'd placed back into my hand on our wedding day. I held it out. "This time, there are no secrets." She nodded through tears. "No secrets." The following month, surrounded by only our parents, Chris, and one very happy 11-year-old girl, we finally became husband and wife. When the minister smiled and asked, "Does anyone know any reason these two should not be married?" everyone instinctively looked at Lily. She laughed, then grinned at Emily. Finally, she looked at me and said, "I know a reason." The entire ceremony froze. She waited just long enough for everyone's heart to stop, then smiled. "The reason is, you're already telling each other the truth." The guests burst into laughter. Even Robert laughed harder than I'd ever seen. Emily squeezed my hand. The minister smiled. "Now, let's try this again." This time, when we said, "I do," there wasn't a single secret left between us.
Every mind holds a story. Welcome to Mindfold Stories, because every person has a story, and some stories change the way you see life.